Very good morning to you. If you're just joining us, welcome. It is the last hour of Newsfeed AM. We take you straight to Davos, Switzerland. The Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, is leading the South African delegation at the 54th World Economic Forum in Switzerland. Now, South Africa has been part of the forum for the past 20 years. Let's speak now to our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, who is in Switzerland. Xolani, good morning to you. And let's begin with perhaps what the messaging from Team South Africa is going to be. Do they have a compelling enough story for South Africa to come with bags of at least projected investment?
Good morning, Oli. Well, that is a big question for many people here and back home. What is South Africa's messaging amid the myriad of challenges facing the country? What are we here to actually tell the investors and the global community? But I was quite impressed by the WEF preview breakfast on Thursday, where the delegation did say that they would not shy away from any of the challenges that are facing the country when they are confronted by those global leaders that are here today. And you are quite right, I am not alone this morning as we kick off our coverage of the World Economic Forum 2024. I'm with our Finance Minister, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, who is leading the delegation to Davos in 2024. Minister, thank you very much for your time. It's day one at WEF 2024. Before we get to the messaging that is so crucial for South Africa's prosperity, let's talk about your impressions of WEF 2024 so far since you have been here in Davos.
Look, I mean, this one is for the first time when we're having this this WEF outside the fear of the pandemic. You'll recall last year there were even tests before you come into the center. Now we're having this thing in a free environment, and there's a larger delegation than we have thought. Also, a number of heads of state are here. So it's quite an impressive kind of delegation that's around this time.
And of course, what is important is South Africa's messaging. What you actually said on Thursday was the fact that you are not going to shy away when you are queried or asked or grilled by the international community about the challenges that are facing the country, which are well documented. But what is the current messaging that Team SA is bringing here? Besides the fact that we have heard over the past 20 years that South Africa is open for business, what is the messaging that you are bringing here this year?
I think the nature of the forum is such that the message you've got to communicate to them is that South Africa is an investment destination. Now, a number of questions arise. Amongst those is, guys, you've got an electricity challenge, guys, you've got logistic challenge, guys, you've got this and that. This delegation that is here, which is composed both of government and business, understand those challenges very well. In fact, at home, that's the message we're communicating. In fact, at home, we've established working group amongst ourselves to deal with those challenges. In fact, as a result of that, we're seeing improvements in the performance of both the electricity and the logistics. And I'm told that in December, numbers for the logistics sector and the mining sector have improved. So we are dealing with those challenges. We're not hiding them. We're explaining them. We're doing something about them.
Let's talk about the themes this year. There are 4 key themes that WEF has identified this year. The major theme is rebuilding trust, which we've seen since 2020. The world is more fragmented than ever. There is now the Ukraine, Russia conflict. We have the Middle East conflict. When you hear of the theme being rebuilding trust, there has been a lot of trust that has been lost. Does it make the messaging a little bit more difficult for Team SA?
The trust issue is not of South African singularity. The trust issue is a reflection of a global phenomenon. It takes two forms, by the way. The first one is the emergence on the trade front in terms of protectionism and fragmentation. That in itself removes itself to the established trading system which we have thrown up to the WTO. The second issue, part of this trust, has been the intensity of the conflicts globally. We may start with the Ukraine and Russia, now with the Middle East. All of those things are eroding the trust that needs to be built.
And of course, when you're talking about that trust being eroded, it brings me to my next question, which you also had to man when it comes to the WEF breakfast that we had back home in South Africa, wherein the questions were around South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice. You said you do not expect, or that case should not be used against South Africa's messaging or its delegation here, because it is quite a divisive war, the Middle East conflict. But if it is raised, what would you tell the global community? Because it is quite a divisive war that is taking place, and the ICJ case has divided the international community around what South Africa's stance is in terms of calling for this war or the conflict to be declared a genocide.
First and foremost, is well known and documented that South Africa has always been on the Palestinian side in terms of this conflict. It's recorded in the United Nations that in most disagreement and where we vote against each other with the Americans has always been on this Israel-Palestinian conflict. So it's an established, it's well known. We will place that first on the issue. Secondly, the United Nations established institutions for dispute settlements between nations. And therefore, that court is a court whose main task is to settle a dispute between nations. And therefore, we can't fault South Africa for following legal processes for dispute settlement through the International Court of Justice. And I don't think there will be people who ask about that, because it's not necessarily the court itself, is the action that in fact is the war between Israel and Gaza. It's always a conflictual situation, because there are those who are supporting Israel, there's those who are on the side of the poor Palestinians that are being bombed every day.
What do you think the outcome around the Middle East conflict should be coming out of the World Economic Forum 2024? Because there will be a day set aside to actually discuss the conflict in the Middle East.
For me, the key question, if I may confine myself not to the broader Middle East but to the Israel-Palestinian questions, there's already an established position by the United Nations of a two-state solution. That two-state solution is, by and large, a key solution to the problem. The problem is that Israel and its supporters have not been keen on finding a solution for a two-state nation. And as a result, therefore, we've got a continuing conflict. So our view is that let's go back to that fundamental question of a two-state nation, which is, in fact, agreed by the international community.
My last question to you, Minister, revolves around what back home we are all waiting for next month when you take to the podium to give us a rejigged, possibly a rejigged state when it comes to making sure we cut the number of departments, something that you actually spoke about in the mid-term budget policy statement. Globally, Minister, when you look at public finances, they are in their worst state. When you look at developed nations, they are also struggling. When you look at developing nations, they are in a much more troubling state of opposition. And there has been a talk that there needs to be access to finance when it comes to public finances. Looking at South African finances and the debt to GDP ratio, looking at the trade deficit that we spotted in some parts last year, these will be the questions that are coming out of investors in the global community here in terms of our state of finances as a country. What would you be telling them, seeing that it's not a South African phenomenon, but a global phenomenon?
Correctly. A number of countries, particularly within the low-income and emerging market economies, have not fully recovered from the impact of the pandemic in terms of their public finances. So South Africa is no exception. Certainly, the global growth is not as promising as it should be to an extent that we can see lifting up all other economies. And thirdly, the size of debt is not the important consideration. The size of debt depends on the capacity of the economy to service it. In other words, the critical question we should be posing: is there scope for growing the South African economy in such a manner that we can be able to service whatever level of debt we're facing? That, to me, is the fundamental challenge, is that we should be working on growth and ensure that whatever debt levels we have, we can be able to service.
And right now, we can be able to service our debt levels.
Right now, we've got a challenge because our growth levels are insufficient to be able to cope with higher levels of debt. That's why we've got to contain higher borrowing.
But you will have more on this, obviously, in the February budget next month.
Yeah, I will have more on this in the February budget next month. I can tell you now, we are operating in a fairly constrained fiscal space. So the message we're likely to put across in February is going to be a difficult one.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your time here at day one of the 54th World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland, where a number of global leaders in civil society, business and public figures are actually meeting here to discuss some of the most pressing issues, including artificial intelligence, including climate change, and the issue of rebuilding trust between nations or within nations, so that this World Economic Forum lives up to the billing that it is making sure that we build a better world for the future. Back to you, Oli, in studio.